Hello, welcome to my tutorial for the Julie bag by Shamballa bags. This is a lovely pattern. I tested this for Sammy and thoroughly enjoyed making it. And then a lovely lady in my group, Mary, hi Mary, she desperately wanted me to make this tutorial. So I decided to make it for her and for anyone else that's interested. So here we are. Now I start with my pattern pieces. As I've said in the past, and if you're not familiar with my videos, I laminate all my pattern pieces because they're great for reusing. It keeps them strong and it saves me having to cut them over and over. And I keep them in my A3 laminated folder. So the pattern pieces, they're very easy to put together. Sammy is brilliant at helping us, and she does the pattern pieces with shapes that you join together, and they're obviously all different, so it's not difficult to see what piece belongs to which piece. So join your pieces together as per the shapes, and you don't have to laminate them, but also any patterns that are on the fold, such as the lining panel piece, rather than cutting the fabric on the fold, I cut out the pattern pieces twice and join them together. Again, you don't have to do that, but it just saves folding the fabric, etc. Because sometimes you can get a little bit more fabric than you need by folding it. So I've done that with all my pattern pieces, and I just want to talk about the foam. Now Sammy has done pattern pieces for the foam. This is the main panel piece for the exterior fabric, and this is the foam panel piece, which is a lot smaller, as you can see, and that's because she's done it for you to fuse foam to your fabric. Now, with respect, personally, I never fuse foam to my fabric. It can look dreadful. When you turn your bag, etc., it can cause bad wrinkling that you will not get out again. So I never ever fuse my foam to my fabric. Now, here in the UK, it's a lot easier to get the foam that's sewing than that's fusible than the sewing, and it's cheaper. So I do buy fusible foam, but when I'm doing an all cotton bag that I'm going to probably want to press once I've made it, I fuse cheap poly cotton to both sides of the foam so that it won't fuse to the fabric of the bag, and that works perfectly. But in this instance, because I'm using vinyl, I won't be ironing the bag, so I don't need to worry about using or fusing any fabric to the foam. Now, as I showed you, the pattern pieces for the foam, you're meant to cut out 4, but I got the bigger piece and I did fold the foam in half, and I cut it. I drew a line 3/8 of an inch in, which allows for the seam allowance of these pieces, and I cut a full panel rather than 4 separate ones, because I'm trying to reduce the bulk, so I don't want to be sewing in foam on 2 seams down the centre. So once I've joined the panel pieces together, I will then add my foam rather than adding the foam first. So I've made 2 panels big enough to sew into the panel pieces, and I've done the same with the bottom pieces and the gussets on the foam. They're all big enough to sew in. I've got my lining pieces, which I have fussy cut. Now, if you haven't heard the term in the past, I will briefly explain what it is. And basically, it's as it says, fussy cutting. So you're being fussy about the way you cut. and I wanted to line up this pattern so that it was symmetrical, that it all was even, rather than having them higgledy-piggledy. So I literally was very careful in making sure that it lined up symmetrically and it all matched so that it will look nice. And I did that with all the pieces. I fussy cut everything, and I actually enjoy it. It can be a bit wasteful, I admit. You do waste a bit of fabric, but if you're using a fabric you've got plenty of, like this, I have tons of it, then it's not too bad. So I did fussy cut every single piece. That's the gusset, the bottom piece, and even the zip pocket, which you're only going to see on the inside. I still fussy cut that because I like to know in my mind that it's all matching. And then I've got my exterior pieces and contrast fabric. I'm using the same vinyl for my contrast and exterior, and I'm not doing, whereas the pattern shows you to do half and half in different patterns, which I did on my test piece, which looked stunning. I just decided to do it in one fabric because that can also look really nice. So I've cut my 4 panel pieces, which I will join together to make 2 larger pieces, and you cut one on the one way and then turn the pattern piece over and cut 2 more that way. So you cut 2 out with the pattern that way up, turn the pattern piece over and cut 2 more. Very important that you do that. And then we've got all the rest of the pattern pieces that you'll see. Sammy's done a list which is so useful. I wish everyone did this, but she's done a list of everything you need to cut out, and also there's a list of the other things that you need. So go through that. And I've also done labels, which I will place it in the group files. So if you want to cut out the labels and use them to attach to your pieces so you know which piece is which, by all means do. It's there in the group for you. So that's it really. We've got all our accessories, like the piping. You don't have to do piping if you don't wish to. I know a lot of people can be quite intimidated by it, and that's fine. It does look quite nice with the piping, but it isn't essential. I've got my double-sided tape. You need 2 connectors, any connectors that you want to use. I'm using these. You can even do a fabric one if you wish to, if you know how to. And for the drawstring pull, I add zipper ends to the end of them, which is quite nice. I've got my bag label, my handmade label. You need 12 grommets, and there's different types of grommets out there. I'm using the ones that you bang into each other or press into each other. You can buy the really fancy ones that fit beautifully, and I do love them, but they can be a bit pricey to use 12 of them. These are lovely, so you can use them if you wish to. And then rivets, good old-fashioned rivets. So without further ado, we shall get on with the tutorial. So I will return with the first section shortly. The first thing we need to do is to sew the panels, the outer panels together. Now, if you're using foam and you want to use it independently, like not in one big piece but separate pieces, now's the time to attach it. And either you fuse it if you wish to risk fusing it, or if you've done it big enough, just to base stitch it around to attach it. I haven't. Also, depending on what you're using, depends whether you need to interface. I don't need to interface the vinyl. And also I've not interfaced the lining fabric, because It's actually curtain fabric, so it's got quite a hefty weight to it, and it doesn't need interfacing. But do interface any fabrics that you think might need it. So what we need to do is put 2 pieces right side together, and we're going to stitch down here at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And we do both pieces, and obviously if you need to pin your fabrics or clip your fabrics together, by all means do, but I'm confident enough not to have to worry about that. And once we've stitched them together, we need to top stitch on each side. So open the seams up. If you've used a fabric that you can press with an iron, do so, because it does help control the fabric. But I'm just pressing it. I do have a roller press somewhere for the very job, so I should be using it. There we go. So I've got my little roller press, and it does help just to flatten the seams out. Okay, so just going to adjust my stitch length as well to slightly longer for top stitching, and making sure my seam is opened. One side, you need to do both sides. Bless you, it's my husband sneezing in the background.
Sorry.
Okay, and we do both pieces. and again on the other side. You may have noticed I'm using a walking foot because I'm stitching vinyl, so it is advisable that if you've got one, to use a walking foot. It really makes a difference. And also I'm often being asked what machine I have, and this is the Janome HD9, and it's an absolutely lovely machine. There you go. Love this machine. So there you go, that's what I have. Now I've got my foam, and I'm just going to put my stitches on a long basting stitch and an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. I shall just baste stitch to the foam to the panel piece. And I don't worry about stitching along the top. And the reason for base stitching rather than properly stitching is to remove this from the seam later on. We want to be able to snip these basting stitches away so that we can just remove the excess that's in the seam. Okay, so we've got our 2 panel pieces here, and we get our pattern piece, and we've cut out the V shape for the darts. Now, if you dressmate like I do, you wouldn't normally cut the dart out, so it's going to probably feel a bit foreign to you, and I thought the same. It was a bit alien, and I was like, are you sure we need to cut it out first? But it's not dressmaking, it's bag making, and yes, we do. We need to cut it out. So I laid this on the pattern, on the panel piece, marked the V, and then cut it out, and you cut the foam as well. And again, when we make this dart, it's going to seem extraordinarily long. Again, this is something I did question, but it is correct. So we fold the pieces together like so, and normally we'd use a pin if we were using fabric, but I'm just going to clip it together to hold it in place. Do the same on the other side. And it's actually quite easy because we've cut it out. It's easier to line it up than trying to match up the lines and so on. So this is quite an easy method to do. And then we'll take it to the machine. So we're stitching this at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, as with all of the stitching. And we literally, instead of normally we'd stitch to the point of the dart, we're not going to. We're going to stitch at a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance the whole time. So it will look like this. It will actually be quite a large dart, and that is what you want. So that's the darts on that side done, on that panel. And again, the same with the other panel as well. So it's a really easy way of doing a dart. So that's the darts sewn, and then what I do is I just, to reduce the bulk, remove the foam. But you only want to remove the foam. And then the next thing we're going to do is the piping. So that's the foam removed, so the bulk removed, and I'll do the same with the other piece, and then I shall return with the piping. Now we're doing the piping cord strip. You can omit this if you want to, you don't have to add the piping, but it does look rather nice with it. So we've got 2 strips that you cut for the piping cord, 37 inch by 1 1/4 inches, and you've got your piping as well. So I'm using 4mm piping cord, but it does say 3mm, but I used 4, and I liked what I used. Now what we need to do is get some double-sided tape and line this along the centre. The reason why I do this is it really helps if you stabilise the cord. Now if you want to mark a line down the centre, but by all means do. I'm doing it by eye. But it does help if you've got your piping cord staying still and not trying to roll off, which you'll see in a moment. So I start about 1 inch down, which you'll see when you come to do it why we don't have it all the way to the top. And I just go along, attaching the cord to the double-sided tape. Just realised I wasn't sure if I was in shot then. And I just like to melt the ends of the cord to stop it fraying. Right, so we've put that on, And now we need to lay some double-sided tape along the edge, because we're going to fold over like so. So I don't put the double-sided tape right to the edge. I put it along about a quarter of an inch in from the edge. And this will sort of make a nice, firm, snug piping. If you do it to the edge, then it allows the piping to move and doesn't give you such a tight, neat finish. So it all helps with attaching the piping. So we remove the double-sided tape backing, and then it's just a case of folding over to meet the other side and tuck it in so that it's tucked into the edge of the piping. I'm not sure if I'm fully in shot. I do apologise. It's really hard when you're trying to do something, of watching what you're doing and then also trying to make sure you're staying in the camera shot. So you're just pressing really firmly. Like so. And then I'm just going to use the roller. I mean, you can use anything that's going to press it in, just to roll along to press the edges down. Like so. It really makes a difference if you can press it down. Like that. So that's one piping cord made, and I'll show you what I do with it, so that the next one I'll just go ahead and do. But what I like to do is to make sure that I have an even spread, is fold it in half and then line it up there like that. And attach it like so. And then we just go around, and you don't have to worry about the clips marking the piping, because this part where the clips are going will not be seen. I'm just going to spread the darts open so that it sits nice and neatly and flush on the back there. I'm unsure about my purple. I bought this purple and I bought 3 meters because it looked really dark on the screen, and it's a lot lighter than I expected. I wouldn't call this purple, I'd call it lilac or lavender. And when it arrived, I was rather surprised. So I'm unsure at the moment whether I like it, but I'll know when I've made it. So I'm just going to leave that in for the moment. You just keep going round and clipping. And instead of going to the very top, you want to leave 1.5 inches down. I'm looking for my ruler. 1.5 inches from the top. You need to sort of send this off, which is there. And then I just clip like that. And another one to hold in place. And I do exactly the same across the other side. 1.5 inches. Like so. And then we just base stitch around the edge to attach the piping. Okay, if I had a Teflon zipper foot, or if this was cotton, for example, I would change to a zipper foot now, but I don't have a Teflon zipper foot at the moment, so I'm using my walking foot just to base stitch the piping to the panel. And I'm doing it on a length 5 stitch, so quite a long basting stitch. And we just stitch around at about 1/4 inch seam allowance. And we stitch both panels the same way. So we've got both panels that have been completed, and now I want to add my handmade label. And obviously if you're not adding one, then you can ignore this part. And there's a marking on here on the pattern panel that gives you a guide on where to place it. You don't have to place it there, you can place it wherever you like. But it looks like a nice part on there. I am going to just slightly, I've used a heat removing pen, so I'm just going to go above that slightly. I want it to be a little bit higher than the pattern marking. So once I marked the line, I saw that it wasn't where I wanted it to be. Too low. So I've marked my lines, and I just use my craft knife to go in through. I've not got my hand anywhere near, but go through the vinyl and through the foam. There we go. And so that you don't fill that through the lining, I like to just add some foam on top so that you never feel that hard metal lump when you put your hand into your bag. So I use Gutterman HT2 glue. I swear by it, love it, and I buy it by the bucket load. Right, so we set these pieces aside now, and we're now going on to the gusset. So we want the gusset pieces, the bottom and the side pieces, and we want the foam pieces to match. And as we did with the side the back and front panels, we're just going to base stitch these pieces to the foam. So I shall do that and then we'll carry on. And because I'm going to be stitching these end pieces to the side pieces, I'm only going to base stitch down the sides. And then we do the same with the gusset. The gusset pieces, the side pieces, and caught up on the, that's better. And the final piece. And now we need to attach the bottom panel to the side pieces with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And remember to put your machine back to a smaller stitch. So I've attached the two side pieces to the bottom, and before we do any top stitching, I just want to remove the bulk of the foam from the seam allowance. It's really quite important you do that. It'll give a better finish to your bag. And it will help your seams lay flatter. Okay, and now we want to top stitch, and we're going to turn the seams towards into the bottom panel and top stitch along there. So I've turned the seam allowance towards the bottom panel. And that's the one top stitching side. And that's the other side. And now we want to get our pattern piece for the gusset, the exterior gusset, and lay this on top of the gusset, and I've cut a line through this so that I can mark where I want the connector to be. We'll do it on both sides. There is a possibility that later on, when you add the gusset to the main panels, you may need to trim the height of the gusset a little bit, so you don't want your connector to be going too high up. So don't put it any higher than the pattern piece shows. And my husband borrowed my screwdriver, so I need to go and retrieve that. I'll be back shortly. Okay, so I've made my marking, and it depends on what connector you're using as to where you place your markings, etc. I want my connector to sit like so. So I'm using the line for the top of the connector for where to place it. And I just want to make sure that I've got the center point. So I've got 3 inches wide, and I place the center there. So I've got my holes marked, and I get my twist punch. And if you're not sure about this, in the group files there are Tuesday tips in the group units, and there's a tip about hole punches in there. So have a look at the units, go to Tuesday tips, and you'll find the various hole punches that I've reviewed in there, and you'll learn about this one. And if you're watching this and you're not in my Facebook group, then please come and join us. There'll be a link on the description of this tutorial that you can follow. And if you can't find it, look for Bag Making Addicts on Facebook and you'll find us. So I've punched my holes ready. I'm not going to add the connectors yet, because they could become cumbersome when I'm trying to sew the panels on. So there's no need to add them yet, but I'll just show you that I've used the largest hole punch I could so that the connector pieces can fit through the holes. And I have to do exactly the same at the other end. And marking the halfway point. So that's the holes ready. So now we can look at adding this to the panels. Okay, now we want to fix our gusset to our main panel. And what I did was I measured from this seam to that seam, and I drew a line in the middle. And for the main panel, we've got the seam that we can use for the centre. And if I was using a cotton fabric, for example, or a woven fabric, I would use pins to fix it all the way around and keep it in place while I sewed it, because I don't want it shifting. But because I've used vinyl, I like to put double-sided tape all the way around the edge, and then I fix the gusset in place. And the first place I want to start is the centre, and then we gently follow the curve round. And if you remembered earlier, I said that you may find you've got an overhang at the top for the gusset. And Sammy basically allows like a centimetre of allowance that you may go over. And as it happens, we have got a centimetre overhang there. So I'm just going to attach this side. And I should find I've got exactly the same overhang if I've put it on evenly. Oh, I've got a pen attached to the double-sided tape. Yeah, so I've got an overhang on both sides. So what I'm going to do is stitch it first. I'm just eyeing that it is central. So now we need to stitch it around. I've switched to my zipper foot now that I haven't got vinyl under the foot or on the foot plate. It's sandwiched with the foam, so I can use the zipper foot now, which is easier to use because it gets me closer to the edges of the piping. So we're stitching again at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. and you should be able to feel your foot against the piping. And you just keep going round. Okay, so when you stitch, you should be able to feel that you're butting up against the piping. So then when you push the bag out, hopefully you'll find that you've managed to stitch the piping on nice and evenly, which I have here. If you found that you've got a bit of a gap, you can just take it back to the machine and restitch that piece that you've not got quite caught up to. But I'm happy with what I've done here. Now with the overhang on the gusset, I just get my gusset piece again, and you do need to use this because you've got the curve at the top, and I just lay it down like that to match it up, and I just use my rotary cutter, which isn't behaving very well. So I think I need to change the blade. That's better. So I've still got the curve of the gusset piece, and for this one I'm going to use my scissors. So line it up like so, and follow the curve of the pattern piece, and then we do exactly the same with the other panel. To stitch that on. So I've attached both side panels to the gusset, and now I'm going to turn it right side out and see if I'm happy with how I've attached the piping and whether I need to re-sew along any areas. It's really important that you're happy with your piping because it can make a difference to the overall look at the end. So you want it to be fitting nice and evenly and snugly in the seams. So this is the first side, which I was able to check when I did it. So yeah, I'm happy with the look on there. Now for the other side, which I haven't seen yet, yeah, I'm very happy with that as well. In fact, I would say here it just needs to be stitched a bit closer. So I'm going to go over this part, and to make sure, because obviously when you turn it inside out you're like, where was it? So what I do is just mark where it is, and 2, so that I know where to stitch, because like I say, when you turn it inside out, you're like, where was it? So yeah, just need to go over that. So I'm just going to mark again there to more or less the top. So there's my markings inside. Oh, I'll show you when I've turned it back out. And I just go all the way around just to make sure. Yeah, everywhere else I'm very happy with. So it's just the one area that needs going over, which is not a problem at all. So I marked from there to there, and I just need to get it sitting next to the, in fact I can even feel it. I just need to get it sitting closer to there, which I'm going to do. Okay, so I went over it. The first line is the basting stitch for the foam, and the second line is my stitching, and you can see where I went a little bit wide, and now I've gone okay again. So that was the first line, and that's the second line. So it's just a bit snugger. I don't need to check it now, but what I'm going to do whilst the bag is like this is to remove the foam from the seam. So I'm just going to cut the basting stitch like so, and it will unravel pretty easily. And using my pointed curved scissors, which are actually my embroidery applique scissors, I go round to trim the foam away, and then just pull on it and the basting stitches will unravel. You don't have to use a seam ripper to unpick them all, it will just come undone. And go all the way around. Make sure you don't go close enough to cut the stitching that's holding the bag together. So I'm going to go all the way around and show you when I've finished. I've done the first side, but I wanted to show you before I did this side that on the one side you've got the basting stitches and the proper stitching, but on the other side you've got 2 rows of basting stitches, the 2 outer layer rows. That's the one that's also stitched the piping to the bag. It's fine to go through them as well. You just don't want to go through the inner line of stitching. So I just wanted to let you know that those 2 lines are fine to go through. Okay, so I have removed the foam all the way around both sides. Remember to do both sides of each panel. So it can be quite hard work, especially if you have arthritis in your hands. It can be quite painful after a little while, but it's worth doing. It really is, because it reduces the bulk considerably, and it just, if you didn't do it, when you turn it right side out, it's not going to have a nice edge to it. It will be a sort of, it just won't fold out nicely. So I promise you it's worth doing. And the other thing to do is just to trim the excess off from the piping cord, and just so that the bag sits nicely when it's turned, just clip the curves sort of every 3/4 centimetre or so. Just make sure you don't clip the stitching obviously, but just go round the curve, and it will help your bag sit that much nicer once you've turned it. And we will turn it in a second. You can probably hear my dog, I don't know, but he's about to be walked, so he's going absolutely mad. So that's that side done. And we do it both sides obviously. And it's worth doing these little things that you might think they're a bit of a faff on, but it really is worth doing it because it adds to the overall look of your bag at the end. So it's worth taking the time to just do these little added extras, and that can be the difference between making your bag a good bag and a great bag. So that's it, that's all the curves done. And then we turn it right side out again. And just push all the curves, etc. And that's your outer bag done. So yeah, I'm pleased with the overall look. We'll put this aside while we make the lining. Okay, now we're doing the lining, and we need to do the darts as we did with the outer. So we've cut a V shape out according to the panel piece markings, and then we fold it right sides together and line up the two edges so that they're matching. And then we're going to stitch 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And you don't go to the tip of the cut, you literally carry on all the way up. And we do both sides, and I know it does look very long, but that's because we want to have a good width on our bag. So that's our darts done, and now we're going to join the contrast band with the lining main panel, and we put them right sides together, and instead of a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, we're stitching at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And then we want to fold the seam allowance down, so it's like that, and we're going to top stitch. One-eighth of an inch seam allowance. If you want to, if you've used cotton, both top and bottom, you can press the seams down. But what I'm doing is just making sure that I've got them taut so that it's as good as pressing. And making sure the seam allowance is pointing down again, stitch the other panel. And that's both lining pieces created. Okay, so I've trimmed the seam allowance on the darts as well, so just do that to reduce the bulk. And then We're going to do the zipper pockets now. So you pick your lining piece, and you need to get your zipper facing, which is 8 inches by 1.5 inches, and you need to place it down 1 inch from the contrast band. And so I measure across, and it's 15.5 inches across. So for my centre point, first of all, I'm just drawing a line across in my heat dissolvable pen, and my centre point is going to be 7 3/4, which I need to mark for the zipper facing. And I'm just checking that it is 8 inches, which it is. So I just want to mark a point at 4 inches to show me where I need to go. And we get to my double-sided tape, my best friend. I'm not sure if my bag making would have been the same without this product. If it would have been back in the days where it was always pins. You can't use pins with the vinyl. And I just have a feeling I don't think my bags would have been quite as good without it. That's my personal opinion. But I'm used to it, using it now, so I probably would cope fine without it. I used to do my dressmaking without it. So, put my double-sided tape, top and bottom, peel it off, and then lay the tape down, level with the lines and the centre point. And we're just going to stitch around the outside of the box all the way round. That's stitched all the way round. Now there's a couple of ways of marking your rectangular box. I could have done it first, which sometimes I do. I just like to change things up every now and then and get a bit bored with doing the same thing every time. So you can either do it on the reverse of the your zipper facing and cut it out before you lay it down, or you can now do it now. Now if your zipper facing was light enough, you can mark it and cut it out on top, or you can turn it over and use your stitch lines as a guidance for where you want your rectangular box in the centre to go. So I shall show you that. And whereas over leaf making it, we would do it 1/4 of an inch into the box, because the stitching is already 1/8 of an inch in. I will do it 3/8 of an inch in, and 3/8 of an inch to the end, and the same on the reverse, the opposite side, sorry, not the reverse. actually I'm going to go 1/4 of an inch in. I prefer that. So that's the beauty of doing it on the reverse. You can make as many lines as you like and it doesn't matter, as long as you cut the right one. So ignoring that first line that I've done, I decided to do 1/4 of an inch in from each line, 1/4 of an inch in from that line, and my box is actually 3/8 of an inch deep, which to me that's fine, perfect. And oh, sorry about that, there was a knock at the door that I had to go answer. Anyway, now we're going to cut the hole by cutting along the lines. And then I just use my clippers to go to the very end. There's many methods to doing zipper bags and the facings. This is just one method. But if you want to do the method that you prefer, by all means do. And then just to cut across, and again, and now we just need to, now we've cut the rectangle box out, we just need to trim the cotton backing back towards the stitching, so about 1/8 of an inch away. Oh, and I didn't think earlier on when I used my scissors that you may think, what on earth are these? These are called Ginger double curve scissors. They're amazing. I use these all the time, and they really are brilliant. They're applique scissors, but you can use them for all sorts, as I do. They're super sharp, and that's Ginger. So yeah, just thought I'd let you know what they are. It can save you asking me. And now we need to get our zip, which is I think 8 inch. Yeah, 8 inch. I cut a bit more because I like to have a bit of room to play with. And we need to put our double-sided tape. You can either put it on the zip or along the opening, which I do, the edge of the opening. Not quite to the very, very edge, but near enough. And then what I like to do is just peel one side off to start with, because it's more manageable. If you peel both off, you end up getting stuck to all sorts. So do one at a time and you've got better control. And I just make sure the zipper pull is pointing downwards so it doesn't get stuck to the zipper tape. And then I want to lay it on the tape, making sure it's fairly even, so that the distance to the zip itself, the zipper teeth, are equal on each side. And if you find it goes off a little bit like I did there, just lift it up, because you haven't pressed it down yet. So just lift it up and relay it. And keep doing that until you're very happy that it's evenly placed. So I've pressed that down, and now I peel this side off and do the same thing, and that's it. So that's nicely laid. And we get our zipper pocket piece, we turn over. Now I haven't stitched this yet. You can if you want to, but it's better not to. So turn it over and we need to lay our double-sided tape just below the zipper and just above. So you're going in with line with your stitch line really. Okay, now we pull off the bottom zipper tape, a double-sided tape backing. If you're using pins, use pins to lay this down and attach. So we're like that, and we're going to stitch along the bottom a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but we're going to turn it over. I'll show you on the video in a minute. Okay, so I've undone the zip, and we're just going to stitch along the bottom close to the edge here. So we stitch a couple of stitches and then go back to lock the stitches and then go all the way along. And I'm just going to send the zip pull to the back and do the last little bit. So that's the only part we've done, just along the bottom here. Okay, so we've stitched along the bottom, and now we bring the pocket piece down, remove the double-sided tape, and then bring that edge up to lay along that edge. And now we go to the machine and we stitch up the side, along the top and down the side. The one thing I should say is make sure the pocket is laying down now, facing towards the bottom. Move the zip pull out of the way. And there we have our zipper pocket made on the front. All we need to do now is stitch down both the edges. And again, making sure the pocket laying down towards the bottom. So there we have it. You don't need to worry about these gaps. You will not notice it in the pocket at all. You'll be putting your hands down. You've got no reason to try and get your pinky up there, which I can't. So it's perfectly fine as it is. All I need to do is remove the marking that I've done with an iron. I would literally just fold it back like that and just nip along, and that's fine. And now that's not in the pattern, I'm going to do a slip pocket on the other lining piece. So I've done a piece of fabric that measures 8.5 inches wide and 12.5 inches long. And I just want to fold it in half. And I'm going to stitch 1/4 inch seam allowance down the side to the middle, leave a few inch gap, 2 or 3 inches, and then around again. And we'll do that, and I'll come and show you what to do from there. And I always like to do a double stitch on the corners just to reinforce them. So I've left a small gap, as you can see, just a couple of inches, and I just want to snip the corners to reduce the bulk, and at the top corner I just do that. Like that, and then turn it right side out. And obviously if you've used a normal quilting weight cotton, you do need to use interfacing, but I've used an upholstery cotton basically. It's for curtains, so it's quite heavy, and it really doesn't need interfacing. It's quite nice to use interfacing cotton type materials because they feel lovely and they're strong enough not to need interfacing, so therefore it makes them slightly less expensive to use. I was just looking for my turning tool to poke out the corners, which I can't find. Oh, there it is. Oh, I use this to poke out the corners gently. And where I've reinforced them, it just helps you not poke a hole through the corners, which I have done many times. Okay, so I need to turn my iron on and give it a quick press because I want a nice crisp edge to do the top stitching on. If you wanted to be a bit fancy, you could add a strip of vinyl about up to 1 inch wide, 3/4 inch wide maybe, and stitch it there and there, like fold it over and just stitch it across the top if you wanted to. Also gives a bit of structure to the pocket, but I'm not doing that. And I just want to make sure that the seam is folded in on itself because we're going to stitch across that. And I want to make sure that by rolling the edges, that the seam is out and not folding in on itself. So I've pressed that And now I'm going to just top stitch along the top. So let's the iron out of the way. I finished top stitching, and now we want to place our slip pocket. So I want to place it 1.5 inches down from the lining here, and I'm just going to measure the pocket. It's just over 8.5 inches wide. So we've got 8.5, 15.5. So that's 7 inches, just under 7 inch. So it's just under 3.5 inches either side. So if we do 3 3/8 that side, should be 1, 2, 3, yeah. So depending on your pocket size anyway, just try and line it up so it's symmetrical. And I did the fussy cutting on my pocket as well. Actually looking at what it's going to be, I'm going to do it 1 inch from the top. That's it. I didn't like how low it was looking, so I lay it 1 inch from the top in the middle of my lining, and I just like to pin the pocket in place while I stitch it. And we'll stitch it down the sides and across the bottom, and whilst we're doing that we will close off the hole at the bottom. So I've stitched the sides and the bottom, and I could, if I wanted to, stitch down the centre so that I've got 2 separate pockets, but I'm going to leave this open as it is so that you can put the larger things in, because some people have very big mobile phones, and if I do 2 single pockets they wouldn't be able to slip their mobile phone in one side. So to leave it like this, they can just lay it in if they wish to use it for that. So that's the both lining pieces prepared, and the only thing left I've got to do, which if you have, is to put your nameplate or name tag in. And I always do it above the zipper pocket, because the zipper pocket I always put to the back of my bags, so when you open it you see it. Having said that, there have been very few occasions where I've put the zipper pocket on the other side, but there's usually a specific reason why. Anyway, I digress. So I know this is 8 inches long, so at the 4 inch mark, and I just stitch down the sides. I've added my name badge. That's both lining panels prepared, and the next thing we have is to prepare the gusset, and for that we need two gusset pieces, the gusset contrast piece and the bottom piece. Okay, so the first parts we need are the lining gusset pieces and the contrast pieces, and we just sew them together, right sides together. And we stitch these at 1/4 inch seam allowance. And as we did before with the lining panels, we make sure that the seam is pointing downwards, and we just top stitch as well. That's one done. Same with the other one. And now we need to attach the gusset pieces to the bottom panel, and we do that at 3/8 inch seam allowance. And we do the same with the other gusset piece. And just to, we don't have to, but I'm just going to top stitch to keep the seam all nice and tidy underneath. We did it for the exterior piece, and it doesn't say to do it for the lining, but I do anyway. Doesn't hurt to be nice and neat. And now we've prepared our gusset, we now need to add it to the lining panels. And I want to mark for the halfway point. So what I do is I line up the sides, and I judge by the sides as to the measurements. So there is 15 inches across, so at 7.5 inches I know that that's where the midway point is. I'm going to do both panel pieces. The other thing you can do is fold the panels in half to find the centre of your panel pieces. So I've marked them. And now we need, again, you can fold in half. I like to do everything by measurement, to be honest with you. I don't know why. but I just find it to be much more accurate. So this is 10.5 inches long, so a 5 1/4 is the central point. Oops, I think I've just marked the wrong one. I said more accurate. So yeah, at 5 1/4. It's because I was going by the numbers and that threw me. Okay, so I'm going to get the line that I've marked with the centre line that I've marked on the gusset and on the bottom piece, and just put a pin in. And I'm using pins on this one because, as I said previously, you can be more accurate for your sewing with pins. So I've pinned this bottom, and I'm just going to pin the side. I'm making sure that the top lines up where the lining matches, sews to the gusset top. I wanted to make sure these parts matched up, because they would stick out like a sore thumb if they weren't matching. And then, having done that part, we add the pins going round. And to get the gusset to fit nicely, we ease it in. Now, if I laid it flat and put it round, we're going to end up with a bagginess, with excess. So what we do is we just curve it. So I'm doing this rather than laying it flat, and it will fit more evenly and more nicely. Oh, thank you, dear. My husband's just bought me a nice cup of coffee. I know it'll be nice because he makes nice cups of coffee. Thanks, love.
Okay. Go upstairs.
Okay. Right, and you really want to get it fit. You can't really cut any off the side part like you did earlier, or may have done earlier, because we've got the matching gusset on the side. So we really have to get this to fit well. And that's what you do. That's why it's called easing, because you are easing it around. So there we go. So I've got it fitted. Once it's laying flat, and we do the same now with this side. Exactly the same. Using clips to start with on there. And we pin it round again. When you come to sew this, you will also sew it with this curve, which I'll show you on the machine. You're kind of tricking the fabric into thinking it fits. And so on. Okay, I'm going to finish this pinning and take it to the machine. Okay, so we start by stitching at 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is to ensure that it fits into the bag around the top for stitching together. And then about 1 inch down, we spread out so that we're stitching at 1/2 inch. So by the time you get to this point, you should be stitching at 1/2 inch seam allowance. This is to ensure a nice snug fit. And I'm lifting it up because this is where I'm stitching, as I said to you, that we stitch and as we come towards the top, and we get to the top here, we then have to think about moving back into a 10 centimetre, sorry, it's 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we gradually move back so that we stitch the last part at 10 centimetres, 10 centimetres, 1/4 inch, I don't know what, I've got 10 centimetres on the brain. Okay, so that's the first part attached, the first panel. And let's remove all the pins. There we go. And I'm just checking that I'm happy with how it's all sewn in. Yes. And now we attach the other panel in exactly the same way, by starting and matching up. Oh, that's what I wanted to show you actually. This is what I mean about matching them up so that they're level. It is really important that they are matching, so because otherwise it's very obvious if they're not. So I shall pin this exactly the same way and sew it as I showed you. So we start exactly the same way on this other side. The difference is we're going to leave a gap at the bottom. We're not stitching all the way around. And you need to leave as big a gap as you can, because if you've done a vinyl bag, it's going to be quite difficult to turn through a small gap. So once I've gone round the bend, so to speak, I then, once I'm on the straight, I stop and I back stitch. So you definitely don't want to stop stitching on the curve. You do need to go round. So we have the lining finished with a nice big gap at the bottom, and we now need to put the two together. So I'm putting to make sure, I want to make sure that the zipper pocket is at the back, so the front goes in, and you put the outer right side out and the lining wrong side out, and put the outer into the lining. And then the most important areas I line up are the seams. Had a bit of foam still stuck at the top there, so I like to open the seams up and lay them flat. It's double-sided tape that I've got a problem with. I couldn't understand why I couldn't open the seam up. Okay, so use a clip. And match both ends up, and you have to talk it into fitting. And because I use double-sided tape for attaching the piping, I just have to undo that. So they're the important parts that are put together, the seams, because you really want them to match up as well. Ooh, got a neck ache doing that. And then we just go around and clip all the edges together, which I shall do and then come back. I've clipped it all the way around, and I've now got it in my machine, and I'm going to stitch at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. I have to stitch it on the inside because my machine doesn't have the free arm where you can remove this part. So that's why I'm stitching it like this. I've sewn all the way around the top, and now I'm going to remove the foam from the top to reduce the bulk for top stitching. And I haven't forgotten to add the connectors to the side. I didn't want to do it whilst I stitched the two layers together, because it would have caused a problem when it came to stitching around those parts. It would have been, they'd have probably blocked the machine foot. I'm trying to think what to say whilst I'm doing this. But yeah, so I always add the connectors after I've turned the bag, and there's a method to my madness. So we trim Okay, so I've removed the foam, and I'm just going to trim the seam allowance as well. So that's trimmed all the way around, and now we need to birth the bag, as they call it, by putting her through the hole in the lining, and I just squish her down and pull her through. Voila. Okay, and then it's this point that we add the connectors, which I shall grab hold of. Right, so I've got my connectors ready, and I go in through the hole in the lining. I'm just going to steam press the markings I made earlier. I can't iron it, but if you shoot some steam at it, the marking will go. So make sure I push the holes through, which I'm sorry if you can't see it. It's a bit awkward to do it and show it to you. But when I edit, I shall try and zoom in. Oops, slipped a little. Can be quite fiddly. That's got it. And once I've got all the screws in, I then go around and tighten them all. I never fully tighten until they're all in. So that's the one side done, and I'll do exactly the same on the other side and come back to you. So I've added the connectors both sides, and the next thing to do is to close the bottom opening, which I went ahead and was doing it without thinking, but I basically folded the seam in and pressed it, and then I put some double-sided sticky tape very close to the edge to close it and keep it closed, and now I'm going to stitch it closed. I'm going to stitch at 3/4 of an inch, not 3/4 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch, see what happens. Oh my goodness me. So that's the bottom of the bag stitched, and we push the lining into the bag. Right, we're just going to set that aside for now, and we still have the grommets to insert at the top, the drawstring strap to make, and the handle, which I will do on my return. Now we need to make the straps. This is the handle strap, and what I've done is I've drawn a line along the centre horizontally, which is 2 inches in, and then I've just put double-sided tape on both sides of the line, and I remove the backing and just fold it in towards the centre like so. I'm just going to use my roller to cut that stick firmly, and do the same with the other side. And then I just put another line of double-sided tape, and this time on the outer edge, about 1/4 of an inch in, because you don't want to risk any of the tape showing once you've sewn it. And then fold that in. Really be careful with this part and make sure that the sides match up perfectly where they meet. And if you find that they don't quite meet, just pull them up and lay them back down. Like so. And you may find, because vinyl stretches a little bit, that they're not quite even at the top. So before I stitch them, I just like to even them up, like so. I've done these straps a little bit longer than is required. I've done them at just over 25 inches. Because I like a slightly longer strap. I believe, I'm just looking to see how long they should have been. Right, it should have been 24, so I've only done it an extra inch and a bit, so nothing dramatic. So now we take it to the machine and we stitch across the top, down the sides and across the bottom. And I should have said, go up the other side as well. So there we have a strap that's made. Just trimming off the thread ends. And then put that aside for now, and we're going to do the drawstring now in exactly the same way, but we're only going to stitch it along the end, the folded end where they meet, not the fold but the the join like that. So it'll be like watching paint dry. Watch me do this. So I'm going to fold it in and then come back. Okay, so I've folded it in and I'm just going to stitch at the end. And then just down the one side. So that's the drawstring stitched, ready to go. And the only thing left now is to top stitch the bag and then make the grommets. So I'm going to top stitch it, which I don't film because I had to put the machine at a strange angle and it's not easy to film. So you'll forgive me for not filming this part, but I shall return when I've done the top stitching. So here's our completed bag, and I've top stitched around the top, and all that's left to do now is the grommets. Now I could have marked the grommets at the start with the main panel piece, but I don't like to, because if your lining up is slightly off or there's any issue with how you stitched it, which is possible, it can go off slightly out of line slightly, then you're going to have holes that aren't lining up. So what I did was I cut the grommet holes in the piece, the pattern piece for the foam, and all I did was I centered it on the larger main panel piece so that you can see it's even all round. Then I drew the holes, I sat it over there, drew the holes, and then I've cut the holes out. I'm happy with where the holes are, and if I place them on the top of the bag at the top, you can see that it lines up nicely and it's evenly placed, and so I prefer to do it that way. So I've lined it up, making sure it's very straight, and then I'm going to draw the holes. Now I am actually using my Sharpie pen because my heat removable pen doesn't stand out so easily, so I don't get to see it as clearly, and there's a possibility I'd misalign the holes. So doing it this way, but you do have to make sure you're very confident with the placement before you draw the holes. Otherwise, you're going to have permanent Sharpie pen marks on your bag. And do both sides exactly the same. And I'm hoping that, like me, you have a green machine and the 10mm hole punch, because it makes life a lot easier to make the holes. And what I mean is, this machine with the punch die there, that's got it shows you the hole size there, and this is what I use to punch my holes. If you don't, then when you bought your grommets, you'll have been provided with the manual punch tool, which I'm not sure where mine is, to be honest with you. I put them away because I don't use them, I don't need them. But it's a manual steel rod, basically, that's got the hole but punch at the end. You put it where you want, you hit it with a hammer. Good luck. That's all I can say. I never got on with it, especially going through fabric. They don't go through fabric very well. In my group, in the Bag Up Making Addicts group, I did a review on all the hole punches. So have a look in them, in the Tuesday Tips unit, and I explain all about the different punches. And so this is my favourite to make the grommet holes. So we said that I've done the markings, and now to line up and cut the holes. And you really want to make sure you are very accurate with the ones you've done, which I'm happy where that is. So cut through, and I just want to make sure it has gone through all the layers. Yeah, it has. And then move along. Another way I've seen them do holes is they don't cut holes for the grommets, they put a cross and push the grommet through. This is for this style of grommets, by the way. This style with this there. So I have seen it where you just put a cross and this pushes the hole open. It's okay if you've done cotton, which is thinner, but I'm not sure if it would work for the vinyl. I've never tried it that way. If you're using the larger grommets like this, you still do a hole, but they're either force fit or they've got screws, but you still need to do your hole. So I'm going to keep making my holes and I shall come back to you for the next step. Okay, so now we want to add the grommets to our bag. So these are the grommets I'm using. I'm trying to do it back, it's like looking in the mirror. So they're the grommets I'm using, and this is the grommet punch. So I put the larger one on upside down, and then I put my bag with the hole over it, and I just like to push down to make sure that the fabric is fitting nicely around the hole. Then I get this piece and I put it that side down. Oops. Oh my goodness me, I'm awful at this. Got to do everything. So curve side up so that it's that way. put it around, and excuse me if I get in the way, I have to stand up for this. I'm not strong enough to do it with just my hands. I have to use some of my weight behind it. You hear the click, and I'm sorry if you didn't see it, if I got in the way. And that's your grommet added. So I'm going to add the rest of them, and I shall come back and show you the rest. That's the grommets added. Looks nice, doesn't it? And now we need to add the drawstring, and we just go in one side and pull it quite far through, and then you just go in and out around the bag, making sure it doesn't twist. Then go across to the other side. Right, this grommet's come off. That does happen if you press it further than it needs to be. You overpress, which I've done. It makes the grommet come away, which is fine. You've lost the grommet, not the end of the world. So you just have to. I jumped ahead and removed the pressing die, which I should have waited until I knew they were all fitted, but that's the good thing about adding this drawstring. You get to feel whether they're all fixed or not. And when the first time I ever used grommets, I pressed down so hard, and they all kept coming off, and I couldn't understand it. And I complained to the company and said, your grommets don't work. And then I watched a YouTube video, and I realised I was pressing down so hard I was actually breaking it. Just want to make sure that's the right one. I've just taken off one. Yeah, that's the broken one. Yeah, and then I realised, so I had to write to the email the company saying, oops, sorry, user error. And I was just pushing it down further than I needed to. I didn't realise that just this light touch like this was enough, and I was going further, and it was clicking 2 or 3 times. So yeah, so if you do use the press, you really don't need to press very firmly. Right, so they're added, and now we need to make the vinyl loop. We're going to make our loop to keep our drawstrings in place. So I've drawn a line down the centre, as we did with the straps, and then I've added double-sided tape to either side of the line, and then fold them in towards the centre, and we don't fold them again. We now stitch down each side. just trim the threads. Now, the next part you don't need to sew, but you could if you wanted to. If you didn't have rivets, then oh, I missed a thread. Then what you need to do is fold them and overlap like that to then add the grommet in the centre. But you could do a stitch line down the centre if you wanted to. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to do both, just to show you. That is if your machine can stitch through 3 layers or 6 layers basically of vinyl. So there I've stitched in the centre. I'm still going to add a grommet because it will look nice. Oops, I'm sorry, I'm not showing you. But if you didn't have rivets, then you could do just that. However, I do have rivets, and so when I find them and I get my screw punch, and I had it for the bigger hole earlier for my connectors. So I want the tiny one now for the rivets. And you can add 1 or 2 rivets, whichever you prefer. I added 1 on my last bag, but I felt it would have been nicer with 2. So I'm going to measure and mark so I get them evenly placed. So one, and 2, and then I get my rivet punch, which I've changed the dies for, and push the rivets in. Oh, there's just a thread I didn't snip. And then I press them on the rivet punch. So that's my rivets added, and we just thread them through. And at this point you can do your drawstring, and you might think, well, that's not going to hold. My grommet's popped off again, how strange. Anyway, I'll do that in a minute. But what you can do now is tie an end in here, or you can do tie an end and add these on, or just add these on. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to put a drop of glue in the bottom, put it on, and then screw it into the back to add that. They look really nice. These are zipper ends, and it looks really effective. So I'm going to sort that grommet out, the pesky grommet, same hole, and I shall show you the finished overall look. Okay, so there's the bag with the end connectors attached, and it's nicely drawn in, and all we need to do now is to add the strap. Now on the ends of the strap you can add some strap ends. You can either add one like that or one like that, or you don't have to add any at all if you don't wish to. And all you need to do is to insert the strap that way and fold over to connect. I'm not going to sew mine because I don't like the stitching to show on this side. I'm just going to use rivets. So what I like to do is get a feel of where I want the strap to sit, to finish, and measure that to get a rough gauge. And it's 4 inches, so I get my heat pen and mark a line for 4 inches to tell me that's where to fold to when I put it back in. And then I just want to mark for the grommets, for the rivets. And the first rivet I put at 3/8 of an inch from the edge, and the next one I put at 1/2 an inch. No, I don't. I forgot. I'm putting the strap end on, so that will make a difference. So just put the strap end in, and then I can gauge where the grommet needs to, the first rivet needs to be. So I'm gonna have a guess at there. Take that out. So for me, that's just over 1/2 an inch. And the next one I'm doing 1/2 an inch. So I know that for the other end I can do exactly the same. And I'll mark 4 inches in from the edge. And then just over 1/2 an inch for the first rivet. And then 1/2 an inch for the second. And I get my rivet punch, and what I do is I don't go through all the layers at first. I do one layer at a time so that I know I'm punching straight and I'm not going wonky at all. So I'll fold that, and I'll get my permanent marker for this. I fold at the line where it's going to be. I'm just going to check that I'm happy with that, actually, that the rivets are going to sit. Yeah, the rivets will attach nicely. And then I line up for the next holes by going through the first holes. So the same with this end. First hole, and then, oops, fold it to the line, get my pen and mark through the first holes for where I want the second holes to be. And I'm going to add the grommets before I add these. It will make it easier to add the grommets. So put the first one in. First one, and the second one. Now if you don't want to add two grommets, two rivets, you don't have to. You can add just one if you want to, but I just like the look of them, and I just think it's nice when there's two. Can I get that in properly? Yeah, no. So now I can add the end piece, and I was wondering whether this one's a bit overkill or not, whether I should use a smaller one. Let me have a look. Yeah, I think I'm going to change and use the smaller one. And what I do is I add just a little bit of glue in the centre. I don't go right to the ends, because if you do that, you'll get a mess poking out of the sides. I've made a right mess of that as well. Oh dear. It was coming out everywhere. So that should hopefully be okay. And now you want make sure that the screws are facing inwards. And the glue has oozed out of the sides, so I just get some old cloth that I have. I like to make sure I wipe it off before it dries on. But if it does dry, it does come away quite easily. There. And then we get our screws. And all 6s and 7s today. Right, and then screw that in. And the screws are sharp enough that you don't need to worry about using a bradawl to score a hole. They'll just go in. Just scraping the glue that it leaks a little bit more. And the second screw in. There. So that's that one fitted. Just rubbing the glue away. There. And I'm going to do the other one and I will show you the finished bag. Here we have the finished bag, which I'll do a photo so that you can see it properly and put it in the group and that. But yes, so that's Julie by Shamballa Bags.